Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video was kind of a requested video, both from YouTube and also when I used to work on counter selling makeup. One of the most questions that you get asked when you were selling a foundation was how to apply it, whether to use your fingers or your brush or whatever. So that's what I'm going to run through. I'm going to let you know what I prefer to apply with my fingers and how to do it, which brushes I like, and you know what foundations to use with the different brushes, and also I'll talk a little bit about this baby here, which is the Beauty Blender, a really great sponge to apply your foundations with as well. So I really hope this helps, and I think I've covered everything. If I haven't, just leave any suggestions below or any of your own tips below as well, because those always help everyone else reading the comments. So when it comes to my fingers or my hands, my favourite kind of bases or foundations to apply with my hands would be like cream foundations or tinted moisturisers, BB creams, CC creams, and then certain liquid foundations. Generally though, say for instance this Vichy Teint Idéal cream foundation, I've been loving this with my hands. I just think it gives a really lovely finish, and I think it spreads really well with the hands. And also with thicker consistencies you can definitely help to warm them up and thin them out a little bit with the warmth of your hand. I'm going to apply some of this Pixie Illuminating Tint, which is a tinted moisturiser, and I'd always start off by popping some product onto the back of my hand. And you would essentially apply it the same way you would like a primer or a moisturiser, but with these I always start in the centre of the face where you need most coverage, because you know around the outskirts of the face is generally much more even toned than the centre of the face, and then just work your way out. I would do a mixture of sliding the product over the face and then slightly patting over the top to help blend it in. And when I'm applying anything to my face with my hands, I always make sure my hands are clean first. So I did wash my hands just before applying these, but I would often have hand sanitizer on hand to make sure that my hands are clean, and I always have baby wipes then beside me just to wipe my hands after applying the product, because you do tend to get quite a lot of product on your hands. So that's one downfall of using your hands to apply product, is that there is a bit of wastage. Which you kind of will get with everything anyhow, but you will get some quite a bit of product on your hand depending on what you're applying. Then another product I like to apply with my hand is this, which is the MAC Face and Body foundation. Now I don't like to apply too many very fluid foundations with my hands because I find it's too runny and it's kind of too messy, but this is a very unique foundation in that if you apply a little bit between your hands, it is quite runny and fluid. But if you actually warm it up and give it a really good rub between your hands, it will thicken and emulsify, and you can feel it getting a little bit hard and sticky, and this is because of the film forming properties in the foundation. And if you are looking for that slightly heavier coverage from it, that's a good time to apply it with your fingers and literally kind of start to press it in place and build up layers that way. Now the only thing again is you'll have a lot of product on your hands, so make sure that you give them a good wipe afterwards and make sure you sanitize as well. Then moving on to brushes, and I'm going to start off with the traditional paintbrush style foundation brush. So this is a flat paddle shaped brush. I personally tend to use this for more dry skin, and I do like it on mature skin as well, and I can pretty much use it with every formula. I tend not to use it with the runniest of foundations because I find you are just chasing streaks the whole time. And that's another thing with this kind of brush, is that you are creating streaks. So as you're applying your foundation, you will apply it more so in downward strokes, just to make sure that you're not raising any baby hairs, and also that you won't cause any dry skin or flaky skin to become more noticeable. And then once you have enough of the product on, you need to kind of pat it in place or lightly kind of rub it down. More so pat it in place though, to try and get rid of the streaks, which can take a while and it doesn't always work perfectly. So I would often finish off with a blending sponge, which I'll get to in a minute, but this can be a great way to finish off when working with these kind of foundation brushes. Now not every foundation will leave marks on your face, so I think it's really important to just test out the foundation with all these different methods and see which works best for the foundation. But this would work very well with this guy here as well, which I already showed. It's the Vichy Cream Teint Idéal foundation. And again, I always work from the back of my hand and pick up a little bit and just start brushing down in downward motions. Always make sure your strokes are quite light. One thing I see a lot of people doing with their foundation brushes, which isn't ideal, is that they really press down, and you can see, you know, it's putting too much pressure on the brush. You're moving any product that is already on your face. So what you need to do is just really, really light motions, always in a downward motion with this particular brush. And on the forehead you can kind of go to the side and down. And again, just kind of pat around and do quick, light little buffs over the top to try and get rid of any streaks. But I would find with this kind of foundation, you wouldn't get any streaks. So this is my favourite kind of foundation to apply with this kind of brush, which just means that it's a slightly thicker consistency cream foundation, and it means that it's not going to leave a lot of marks on your face. Another foundation would be like the Studio Sculpt foundation. That works quite well with this kind of brush as well. And the Studio Sculpt foundation also works really, really well with your hands. That's actually one of my favourite ways to apply that foundation. I don't always love it with brushes, but I think again when you press it into the face with your hands, it works really, really well. Then you have your different type of foundation brushes. So this is your Duo-Fibre brush. I tend to use this with fairly light to medium consistency foundation. So I wouldn't use it with anything very, very heavy. I wouldn't use it with a cream compact foundation personally. It can be used, but I just don't love it for that. And I like this with the more fluid foundation. So I'd use this with like Studio Fluid or the Maybelline Fit Me foundation. I'll actually apply a little bit of that. So this is a slightly more fluid foundation. And again, I'm going to pour it a little bit onto the back of my hand. And you really have to be careful using this kind of brush. You are only supposed to blend with the white tips. You're not supposed to let any product get into the black. And again, that's one thing you see happening too often, is that people put too much pressure on the brush and cause it to just absorb tons of product, and it leaves streaks if you put too much pressure. So I don't know if you can tell, like if you were putting too much pressure on, it would look more like that. Whereas I am literally just letting it kind of kiss the top of my skin and do these little buffing motions. And this is why this isn't ideal for the drier skin types, because buffing motions can definitely raise any dry skin or flakes on the skin. And just back and forth and just little circular motions. And again, do not put much pressure on the skin. This is great for when you're in a hurry and you just want to whack the foundation on, because it's a bigger brush and it does allow you to get the product down much quicker. I personally wouldn't use this with a foundation that dries too quickly. So I really don't like to use this with maybe the Prolong foundation by MAC or the Estee Lauder Double Wear. I'll show you what brushes I like for those in a sec. And another thing this is really good for is, of course, stippling. So this is called a stippling brush, among other names. But what you would do there is literally just pick up a little bit of product, and you want the smallest amount of product. You'll just want to see a few little beads and then start to stipple this in place. And that's how you get that airbrush to look. So you won't necessarily get that with the buffing, even though I do like the finish that gives. But that's what you're supposed to do with this, is stipple. Now this will take a longer time. You have to have patience with this. But what this is good for is anyone with texture on their face or who has kind of slightly more noticeable pores. This is good for literally kind of filling them in, because the little white hairs, when you're bouncing them over the skin, will just help fill in any indentations or any little holes in the skin. And you just very lightly, and again, you don't want much pressure, you don't want to bend the brush, just very lightly tap it and bounce it over the face and keep going until you're happy with coverage. So then when it does come to those foundations that are a little bit thicker and dry a lot faster on the face, I like to use smaller headed brushes like these. So this is the e.l.f. small stippling brush. This is the stippling brush then by Real Techniques. You can use these in the exact same way that I just used this one. But because they are smaller, you'll find that you just won't cover as much space in as quick a time. And I find when I am working with a thicker foundation, which I won't actually apply now, I'll just kind of show you. But if I am working with a thicker, faster drying foundation, I'll do a little bit at a time and do the exact same thing, either buffing or stippling. So you can use these brushes if you're drier skinned, but you would only really be stippling, you wouldn't be buffing, and it might take that longer. But just do that the exact same way, but you would just take your time at it. You wouldn't do it as quick. You wouldn't just kind of, you know, fly over the face like you would with this. So just take your time, work in one small area at a time. Once you're happy with that, you move over. And again, I would definitely work from the back of my hand. I'll just use the Maybelline Fit Me for this, but let's just pretend that it's the Prolong by MAC. So you would just do small little motions like this. And because these brushes are smaller and more tightly packed, you will actually get better coverage. So this can give good coverage, but general rule of thumb is the smaller the brush, the better the coverage you will get. It's the same when you're applying eyeshadow. You know, if you apply your eyeshadow with a small densely packed paddle brush, you'll get really good coverage, and then if you just use like the 224 or a very light blending brush, it'll only give a bit of a wash. And again, this is really good for building up coverage for anyone who wants just better coverage, slightly better coverage from their foundations. So you could do that with this little guy here as well, or as well with this kind of brush, which is the 159 by MAC. It's a slightly different shape, but essentially it'll do the same thing. And these beveled brushes, the ones that are a little bit rounder at the top, are great for getting in around the nose and stuff like that. And again, they're really good for pores. Then speaking of this small little brush, what I love this kind of small dense brush for is for applying a cream compact foundation. So for instance, this is the Max Factor Miracle Touch Cream Foundation. This is a lovely foundation, and I find you do need something slightly more densely packed to apply it because it is that little bit thicker. It's a more waxy consistency, and these apply them beautifully. And again, you can use a bigger brush if you want, but the smaller brush I find will just give that slightly better coverage from them. And these are the kind of foundations that tend to leave marks in your skin if you use your fingers only. Just because they are a little bit thicker and, like I said, waxy, which tends to retain shape of indentations and like brush marks and stuff like that. So this kind of one where you can kind of buff any marks away works a lot better than using this kind of brush. Now you can absolutely use this kind of brush with it, but again it'll just take that little bit longer and you would be better off finishing off with a sponge afterwards. Then another brush I really like for cream makeups is this guy here, which is the Expert Face Brush by Real Techniques. Now I know a lot of people like using this with liquids. I just prefer it with thicker creams and with compact creams. So that's a really lovely one. And another thing I love this brush for is for using it with mineral makeup, so mineral powder foundations, or something like the Studio Fix Powder Plus by MAC. This will buff any of those powders into the skin just beautifully and give a really lovely, quite a medium to full coverage finish, because again it's really densely packed. Another great brush for applying those powder foundations would be something like this. This is the Kabuki brush by Bare Minerals. This one's really old, but even though it is very full and has loads of product, it's still not quite as dense as this guy. So I would find that I get more of a medium coverage with this. You could even use slightly lesser or less densely packed brushes to apply those powder foundations to give just like a hint of coverage. And for that I would actually just use something like this, which is a normal powder brush. And this is natural haired. So when you are thinking about what to apply your foundation with, think of what the foundation is as well. So you want natural hair bristles for powder foundation because it picks up the product much better, and you'll find you won't have as much fallout and stuff, and it'll just spread it a lot nicer. This is the SONIA KASHUK number 29 brush. It's a really beautiful brush. Then when it comes to having sensitive skin, I would actually stick with my synthetic bristles, just because natural hair bristles can cause more irritation to some people than the synthetic bristles. So maybe stick with the synthetic ones if you are more on the sensitive side, and there are some amazing synthetic brushes out there nowadays, so you don't have to worry about your foundation not looking as well as if you were using a natural hair brush. For liquids and creams anyhow, I always tend to go for synthetic hair brushes because it'll just absorb less product and it'll spread a lot better, again because it's not soaking everything up. It'll just help to spread it out over the face better, and you do tend to get better coverage from the synthetic ones as well. I actually nearly forgot to mention one of my favourite foundation brushes, a type of foundation brushes, and it's a flat top Kabuki like this. So it can become absolutely totally flat, like this guy by SEDONA Lace, or it might be a little bit angled, but either way the actual like top of it is totally flat. There are no hairs popping out. It is just totally even, and I love this one for spreading out more liquid products. So I do prefer this one with the more fluid products than with the creams. Again, you can use it for either, but I find that I'll get the best finish with my liquid, my very, very fluid liquid products, by spreading it out and over the skin with this kind of brush. This is the 103 Defined Buffer by Zoeva, and it's just a beautiful, 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 beautiful brush. I wanted to talk about the Beauty Blender then as well. So this is something I've only really started using more recently. I bought it when I was in the US last year. And even though I really liked it when I first used it, I wasn't as bothered about using it until more recently, and now I'm obsessed with it. This will literally give the nicest finish and coverage and everything to your foundation. I find a lot of the time what I'll do is apply my foundation with my brush or with my fingers and then finish it off with this. So don't think of this as an applicator, but think of it as a finishing tool. So I will often apply the foundation over my face and then just finish off by bouncing this over top. Now, saying that, if you want, you can pick up whatever's on your hand left over and use it to apply a little bit more coverage to the face where you need it. And this will definitely give you good coverage, because this is applying foundation without picking any up. Because it's damp, you have to use your sponges damp. I wouldn't use this dry by any means, and I'm not as much of a fan of those wedged latex sponges. You can use them, and again, if you are using them, make sure they are wet. They'll always work a little bit better wet, but some people will have to be careful about the latex sponges because they may have an allergy to it. So again, with this, you need to bounce it over the top. Generally for the bigger areas, what you'll do is use the fat bottom and just bounce. You don't need to like absolutely whack the hell out of your face. You just lightly bounce it around. And then for the smaller areas, so in around the nose or up around the eyes, if you're doing your concealer with it, you can use the smaller pointy areas. So this is a really, really, really handy tool. And then you can either wash it after every use and leave it to sit. That's probably the best way to do it because of bacteria. You don't want that to form. Or you could just leave it sit and then wash it before every use. But if you do it that way, just make sure that you are using something definitely antibacterial, because if you leave it sitting dry and dirty for a few days, a lot of bacteria will harbour in that, because obviously it's wet and that's what bacteria loves. So I hope this was helpful. I'll finish off quickly and just apply some of my MAC Mineralize SkinFinish with this guy. So again, you just buff it on in small little areas. And you want to go lightly enough with this because you don't want to totally move the foundation that's underneath. I would often do this with mineral makeups, or even with this guy without any foundation on, and use this as foundation because this will give really, really good coverage. So again, in downward motions, you always want to go in downward motions and then buff and down. Never go up with your brush because that'll just raise hairs. So I hope this was helpful, guys. If you do have any questions left for me, just leave them down below and I'll try to get them as soon as possible. And in the meantime, I'll just see you all in my next video. So take care till then, guys. Slán. Hey everyone, so I'm going to start off this month's shift stash with my MAC order that I mentioned at the end, I think, of last month's shift stash that I was waiting on, and I was kind of hoping it would come in